righty. Happy Wednesday, everyone. I am Meaghan Ziemba, and this is Mavens of Manufacturing. And today I have Julia Boswell with us. She is a security and compliance lead at ProShop ERP. Welcome, Julia. Thank you so much for coming today. I know we had scheduled for last week, but you had some technology issues, good old technology during remote working time. So I'm glad that we were able to reschedule for today. But I'd like to start off with just getting an introduction of who you are and what you do and how you got involved with ProShop, if that's possible.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first off, thank you so much for having me, and thanks so much for rescheduling the event. I actually don't have a formal background in tech. I studied liberal arts in university, and then I worked in copyright for a few years before deciding to switch careers. So I was hired at this present company, ProShop ERP, a few years ago, mostly for administrative support. And I wasn't really thinking about cybersecurity at all until my boss recognized that maybe I, had an aptitude for it. And suggested that I read one of the information security standards, which I did. And it was crazy. I thought it was insane. And I thought, I'd sign me up. This is amazing. So that, I've had kind of an unusual journey into, cybersecurity and by extension manufacturing. But now that I'm here, I'm very happy.
So I'm curious, as you said, you started in liberal arts, and this is before we get into the cybersecurity stuff, because I'm really interested in that. Why were you looking for a career change? Were you just bored or not? What was your reasoning for wanting to get out of that area and into something else?
Yeah, I was looking for a challenge and a change, and I'd always sort of been interested to switch into working in tech. I thought maybe, I would succeed there. So I just kind of followed that instinct. And that's what I did.
Really fun. So you brought up cybersecurity, and one of the things that we're going to be discussing today is the CMMC standard. And back in January of 2020, the Department of Defense released version 1.0 of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is the CMMC standard. So can you explain to us what exactly this is and why, there's a whole bunch of information you sent to me before our conversation, and I got a little overwhelmed because I didn't realize how much information, but it stated that there's domains involved, capabilities, practices, and processes. So can you kind of explain what this new standard is and a little bit of maybe give a brief overview of why it's important in terms of cybersecurity?
Yeah, I would love to. The CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, it's a mouthful. It's a unifying framework that is meant to really standardize cybersecurity capabilities across the defense industrial base. So It's actually a conglomeration of various information security standards, but it mostly draws almost directly from, actually very directly from the NIST 800-171 standard. And in fact, all 110 separate and distinct security requirements are included in the CMMC. So it was designed with an emphasis on protecting sensitive information, particularly what is called controlled unclassified information, or what we call CUI. Some people call it QE. That's kind of a cute name for it. And basically, so it breaks down these controls into 17 different domains, which you can think of as thematic groupings. So to name a few, there's access control, there's awareness and training, there's physical protections, and then there's the nitty-gritty of cybersecurity, like system and information integrity. So it's extremely comprehensive in its reach. If you'll allow me to continue further, because it goes deeper than that, each of these domains is it has a list of capabilities associated with it. And that's essentially just a basic list of activities that you would need to perform for that domain.
Okay.
So for access control, one of the capabilities is control internal system access. Very helpful, I know. But nested under those are the actual requirements that you would need to implement to prove you have capabilities in that area. So, for example, for that one domain, for that one capability, there's 14 separate requirements that you would need to enact to prove you have that capability. So there's 5 levels to CMMC, 17 different domains, some number of capabilities I can't remember, and that's broken down into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you want level 3, you actually do have to complete levels 1 and 2. So it is it builds on itself in that way.
So why is it important for manufacturers then to comply with the CMMC? Because I work for a manufacturing company in Chicago right now. The company's called PhotoFab, excuse me, and they are a photochemical etching company, and we do produce several small components for aerospace, defense. And this is something, that we were informed of, that we were applying for. And they did talk about like the length of the application process and, why we're going through it. So for small to medium-sized manufacturers, why is this important, and what, I guess, are the consequences if they don't apply for this new standard?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people are kind of, being voluntold they need to do this. Basically, any manufacturer that has a defense contract or is in the defense contract supply chain, including those with controlled unclassified information, they're going to need some level of certification. That's just, if you want that contract, you're going to need the certification. So in some ways that makes our lives a little simpler because we don't really have to question whether we need it or not. If you want those contracts, you need the certification. The level to which you need to,
So if you don't apply for this and you're in the defense, you're basically not going to get those contracts, and you probably need to look in other industries that don't require it.
Exactly. Although that raises an interesting point, which is that there's been some discussion about this, if this is successful, which we are planning on it being successful, it may very well be carried over into other organizations, other departments, other domains, just because this is, the CMMC asks a lot of us, and it's very complicated, but really what it's asking us to do is kind of get our cybersecurity in order. And every company, I think, right now is thinking about that in some capacity, especially with everyone having worked remotely for the past year or so, right? The timing, it's because it's going to take a few years to get all the assessors trained and all the audits performed. I will mention that the DoD released an interim rule last November that's based on the NIST 800-171 standard. And you can think of these as 2 very similar things. It's called the SPRS. That's called Supplier Performance Risk System. And basically any company that needs CMMC is probably under a directive to submit their score to the DoD. And this is essentially like a check-in, right? Like it's taking a little bit longer for CMMC to be implemented. The DoD wants to kind of know where everyone is at. It kind of functions as a check-in. So what you'll do is you'll say, this of the 110 security requirements, each one has a separate and distinct score. You'd add them up, and that's your overall score. I will say, to our audience members, like if you have a low score, that's okay. It doesn't automatically disqualify you for a contract. Again, they just want to see that everyone is sort of thinking about this, is preparing, and that they're kind of keeping everyone on track with that. Yeah.
Gotcha. So we did hear about NIST a couple of times within some of your dialogue. And my question is, do manufacturers need to have both then, or does this completely like void out what NIST is, or is NIST still going to be important to have and still going to be around?
Yeah.
And if it is, like, what can you kind of explain some of the differences or similarities between the two?
Yeah. I mean, when talking about the differences between these two frameworks, you really just need to remember that the CMMC contains the entire NIST 800-171 framework,
Okay.
often completely verbatim, along with additional requirements that the CMMC board kind of added to kind of beef up the requirements. So you can have the NIST standard without the CMMC, but you can't have CMMC without NIST. It's really the bedrock of the CMMC. The differences between the two are, in terms of content, not actually that different, other than the additional requirements that CMMC added. The main difference is that when people were under a NIST directive, excuse me, they had to self-attest, or they could self-attest that they were compliant to the standard. And, this didn't work very well for people. It's a really complicated standard. There wasn't very much help in terms of navigating it. And then also people were just saying like, yeah, I think I'm compliant, without actually there being a verification process that they were. So, this was kind of leaving us in a bad position as an industry. So the CMMC changed that so that it's now a formal certification process, and you will be audited for that certification by a third party who, are all trained to look at very distinct things, who will come on site to your organization. So that's really the main difference. I do just want to take 1 second to talk about NIST. I highly recommend to everyone that they familiarize themselves with the NIST organization. There's so many acronyms for me to remember, but it's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And they are like one of the gold standard organizations that everyone who works in tech should know about. They have a NIST standard for almost anything that you can think of. It's extremely far-reaching and detailed and very helpful as well, and free as well. You get all this stuff online for free. I often joke with my people at my company, there's a NIST standard for that. Like, if you're wondering, how do I do this? This is complicated. There is a NIST standard out there for you to look at. It might confuse you further, but it'll get you farther.
So with all of this information, and I agree, I think engineering and manufacturing have way too many acronyms and should try to shorten some of those things down
Yes.
to make life easier for all of us. But what do you think are some of the main challenges for small to medium-sized manufacturers when they're trying to incorporate this and getting certified? And can you maybe explain, how ProShop gets involved with that entire process? Because I can get a little overwhelmed with like books of information, and because I'm more of a visual learner than anything, and a hands-on learner. So I know with at PhotoFab, when they first announced that we were going to be doing this standard, they were like, it's a book. Like,
Yeah.
It's a book of information. So I'm kind of glad that I'm not at that level, that whoever needs to go through all those, requirements and stuff. I'm glad they have to figure it out, not me. But what are some of the biggest challenges when companies are applying for this? Where does ProShop come in to make that easier? And then any advice too that you might have to make it a little more fun, I guess, to apply for the standard.
Information security as fun. That's an interesting question there. I'm going to break this down into kind of a few chunks. First, I'm going to talk about the challenges, because let's be honest, there are many for everyone, but especially for small to medium-sized businesses who don't have infinite budgets and don't have infinite resources for this. So first off, businesses will know what level they need to be certified to. So there's not going to be any mystery there, thank goodness. But, the challenges will really depend on the organization. So bearing in mind that it's estimated to take between 6 months and a year to implement the CMMC requirements up to level 3, and that it will cost some number of thousands of dollars minimum, likely, just to get the certification to maybe bring on more resources. With all of that in mind, with the time, the resources, organizations really have to consider how they're going to implement these requirements in ways that work for them. So I really can't stress this enough. Like the CMMC and the NIST standard will say that you have to do something, but they won't necessarily say how to do it, right? They're not going to give you a prescriptive list because all organizations are going to be different. So you really want to be careful about not wasting money or resources, enacting programs or buying applications or hiring people that really is too much for your organization. So, again, the CMMC will say, do this thing, but how you do that thing is really up to you. So in some sense, there's a lot of freedom and opportunity here to architect a cybersecurity department that's hyper tailored to your organization. But how can they actually, do this? Likely you'll have to hire a cybersecurity consultant to assist you if you can't source in-house. But, again, you really want to look at the standard, read it in its entirety and really pinpoint areas where, and asking yourself, like, can I resource this in-house? Do I actually need an additional piece of software to meet this? What do I have on hand that I could leverage or use to meet this requirement in a creative or unique way? So, I really think that there's an opportunity here to get really hyper specific about what the organization needs, and just bearing in mind that this is the cybersecurity field right now is a bit of a wild west. There's a lot of people, trying to sell you things and offer you things that you might not need and that might not work for you. So, I really encourage people to just spend an evening with that standard, just familiarize yourself with what's really going on and pinpoint areas where you're pretty sure that you don't need to hire anybody, you don't really need to add anything or spend anything. And there are areas like that, right? Like the physical protections domain. A lot of that, you don't need to hire a $500 an hour cybersecurity consultant to tell you to lock your doors, right? So that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. In terms of actually getting the assessment done, there is now one, they're called C3PAOs, which is one of the most awkward acronyms I've heard so far. But essentially, that's a third party.
It sounds like the droid in the Star Wars movie.
Yes. Maybe that's what they were going for. But yeah, so there's one of those now. They were just assessed and released and announced, a couple weeks ago. So those are going to start trickling in more and more. Once more of those are available, you will just book one of them on the CMMC marketplace, and then you'll go from there. So, how long that's going to take is, I think we're gonna find out soon enough. But the DoD is not going to come knocking on your door, September 1st saying, where's your level 1 certification? Because they know that there's not enough assessors right now to assess everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of like, how does ProShop fit into all of this? So ProShop is a manufacturing ERP system. It's, fully digital and paperless. And we've actually been considering and thinking about the CMMC since we learned about it, I think in 2019. Time now is hard to tell, what with that missing year of 2020. But we really let it inform the development of our software and our sort of thinking about our company, basically since we were aware of it. So, we built multi-factor authentication capabilities into the software. So you can use YubiKeys with ProShop, for example. And we're in the process of, figuring out what other multi-factors we want to add in there. But we started with the most secure. We also added, password configuration settings, so you can, hyper configure your password requirements for staff. That's one of the requirements of CMMC. And then, beyond that, we've built and are, still kind of currently developing and working on what we're calling the security flying start package.
Okay.
So we kind of asked, what would it look like for someone to try to implement the CMMC standard who was totally new to information security and who just needed a bit of help trying to figure it out on their own, some guidance. So we broke the standard down into kind of digestible chunks, presented in a more or less logical order. Again, the CMMC just lists things. They're not necessarily going to say, do this in this order, and this makes sense to do before that. They just present the material for you. So we sort of broke it down, made a kind of a logical ordering to things, and it also has, explanations. It has a lot of links to NIST resources, and, actual tasks and prompts to either change something within the ProShop platform itself, go to this password setting and update here, or, it'll prompt you to go check a setting on your network. So in that way, ProShop was really, I think, designed, and I think it aims to be as like full scale as it can be for manufacturers. And this is just like the next iteration of that. A lot of our clients are concerned about CMMC, so we wanted to offer them something that was gonna help them, and that was just kind of built into a platform that they're already using. And I will add that, we ourselves are also aiming to be CMM certified, so we're going through this process ourselves. So we're really just like really deeply embedded in this at this point, both implementing things ourselves and figuring out, what's going on here, but then also trying to, bring, our client base along with us so that we can all kind of transition smoothly into this world where we all have, hyper connected and proficient cybersecurity departments.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is if, as an ERP company, is this something that you yourself also need to be certified in to like provide these services and products to manufacturing companies? And like, how has that process been for all of you at ProShop? Is like, when did you first hear about the CMMC, and what has that journey been like for you as a company to really be not just a student of CMMC, but you're basically becoming an expert, an industry expert. So how has that gone?
Oh yeah, I mean it's been very difficult for sure. There's lots to consider, especially for our organization, because we're both a company that provides these things, and we are trying to be certified ourselves as well. So there are some things where we decided we kind of needed to draw a line. So we have a few cybersecurity consultants who we work with that we either, will sometimes ask questions to ourselves, but mostly just as a trained cybersecurity consultant that we can refer our clients to, who can help them with the more nitty gritty aspects of the standard. What we're providing by definition has to be quite broad and not specific, just because we can't be telling people the best way to manage their cybersecurity. It's really something that businesses need to decide for themselves. So, I guess when we first heard about it, this was in 2019. We were actually in the process of integrating and building a package for a separate information security standard, both ISO 27000 series, if anyone's familiar, and the NIST. So we really had to pivot a lot when the CMMC came out, because we realized that was just going to be what everyone was concerned with. That was going to be the gold standard. So, we did do a little bit of prep work, and that kind of prepared us looking at those other standards. But as soon as CMMC came over, it's been a totally different ballgame.
And I think you brought up a really good point earlier when we first started our conversation. Cybersecurity is not just going to be within manufacturing. Like there's already, applications within medical that are using remote communications. There's, things going on with the healthcare industry. Schooling is doing it and has been doing like online work. So there's a lot of different ways for people to hack your information. And I know personally, because mine has gotten hacked before, and that just was a headache in itself, So if you're selling something for manufacturing, especially with the defense industry, it's so important to not have that information, just taken or anyway. So
and it can get gnarly in this industry as well. Like if your data is stolen and you do have a breach, like you need to report it to the Department of Defense and the FBI. Like they want to know about it, that that's happened. I've heard of it in our industry already. So yeah, it's not only a huge kind of headache and stressful situation to go through, but it doesn't really end because of the nature of these breaches that are happening these days. We're almost out of time, and I could just talk about this forever, but long and the short of it is you definitely want to prevent your data from being breached in the first place, because once it is, it's a whole other thing you got to deal with.
So before I let you go, Julia, I started Mavens of Manufacturing back in December because one of the things that I noticed going on in the sector is that there's not a lot of women. We're still at a low percentage. It's around 30%. And I just wanted to personally ask you, what sort of advice would you provide someone in the younger generations of, when they're stuck thinking about what kind of career pathway, because you mentioned earlier that you changed your career pathway. So what sort of advice would you offer to any woman, either stuck about where they want to be for a career, or, maybe some advice on why they should think or consider manufacturing or technology for a career pathway?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the best advice is always, follow your passion and follow what interests you. I definitely found something that I was really, really keen on, and that kind of helped with the difficult aspects of switching careers, in my 30s. But also just it's really never too late to switch careers, and manufacturing and tech and cybersecurity as well has, I think it's 10% is female identified workforce. So it's never too late. You can switch really at any time, and there is such a need of people in these industries that if you can do the work and you like it, I really think that there are jobs. There's jobs available, right? Like, and in terms of like the industry for women, like I really, I don't have a lot of horror stories at this point in my career, right? Like I, have connected with a lot of other women. I have a lot of male allies. Like it's not as scary to be a woman in this field as I think maybe people think it is. And then just as like an aside, there's also lots of ways to be involved in these industries that have nothing to do with actually manufacturing products or, working in cybersecurity. There's elements of my job that just have to do with compliance. There's, administrative support that is needed that, still need very competent people. So there's lots of opportunity here. And I think if you're interested, you can find a space for yourself.
Absolutely. And I think another good point too is with all the advancements in technology, there's going to be so much need for programmers and mechanics and maintenance people. And you brought up an interesting point too, now that cybersecurity is becoming more and more, and manufacturers are looking to automate a lot of their processes, they're going to need the CMMC and then those cybersecurity consultants that can help process all of that information with the standard.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Julia, for coming on today. If anyone else wants to learn more about the CMMC standard and what ProShop ERP can help with concerning that standard, where should they go to learn more information?
I mean, I think they could go to our ProShop website. I think it's, yes, there we go, right on the screen. Thank you. You can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to connect with people on LinkedIn. You know, that's my network. I learned so much from my network there. Or, you know, just, you know, feel free to pop me an email if you have questions.
And you also write a lot of information too, because you sent me a couple things that you've written personally, correct, on the CMMC. So yeah. I highly suggest anyone that has questions about it, go to ProShop ERP, look up her writing. It's very informative, and it does produce a lot of questions if you're not familiar with what that standard is. And that's a good thing, because we want to make sure that we're doing all these things right. So
yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much again, Julia. I appreciate it. And everyone out there that came in to listen today, we appreciate you as well. We have another episode of Mavens coming at the end of this week, so be sure to tune in and on Friday at 11:30 Central as well, too. Until then, have a great day. Bye, you guys.
Thank you so much.
This episode of Mavens of Manufacturing has been sponsored by Thinker. Thinker helps solve meaningful, measurable problems for organizations that change the world. Grow your business, reduce your risk at thinkerventures.com. That's thinkerventures.com.